Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. If you are joining for the first time, this session is part of our digital transformation series, for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, and we are going to pick one topic related to digital transformation, and we are always going to have one panel that is willing to share their insights and wisdom. For today, the topic is going to be omni-channel strategies as well as architecture. This is one of the most complex architecture that you may have seen or experienced if you have the omni-channel business model. When you start with it, obviously it's going to be easy because the majority of the processes you are going to have are probably going to be manual. But as you grow and scale, you are going to see real challenges if you don't have your architecture hashed out, whether you are talking about really reconciling the data across the systems, maintaining loyalty across the systems, maintaining scenarios such as buy online, pick up in store, or it is going to be S&OP planning, which is always the most challenging. All right, so we are going to start with everybody's intro. I am going to start with Chris. Chris, would you like to start with your intro?
Sure. Thanks, Sam. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Gherardini, president and founder of Turnkey Technologies, who have been implementing ERP solutions for 27 years. Glad to be here to talk about this topic.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Chris. Steve, can I move to you next for your intro, if you don't mind?
Sure. Thanks for having me on, and good to see everybody here. My name's Steve Rice. I'm the founder of .com Jungle and the Globally Conscious Leader. And we've been helping companies make and implement wise technology choices for about 20 years and have about a 12 to 13-year average client retainer retention.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Steve. Mike, can I move to you for intro next?
Absolutely. Sam, thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Ryan. And what I do is help manufacturers and distributors, quite frankly, solve inventory problems. And it leverages people, process, and technology. And I'm happy to be a part of the panel today. Thanks for having me.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Mike. Chuck, can I move to you next for your intro?
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Chuck Coxhead. I'm with ProCensus. My mission in life is to create warehouse superheroes, and we apply mobile and wearable technology to warehouse workers so that we can speed fulfillment that is really powered heavily by e-commerce right now, isn't it?
It indeed is. Thank you so much for being here, Chuck. Okay, so we are going to start with the stories of omnichannel architecture. And the reason why omnichannel architecture is typically difficult is because when you look at the way organizations are structured, they are fairly siloed. It's very, very, very hard to get, your finance, marketing, your operations, logistics, to sit on the same dinner table and agree on the ideas. And typically, what you need to do in case of your omnichannel architecture is you need to have clear understanding of which system is going to act as a source of truth, because each of the decisions that you are going to make is going to have implications on your business model as well as on customer experience. Okay, so Chris, I am going to start with you. Do you want to start with a story that in which you implemented an omni-channel architecture? In your case, try to describe different business objects, such as, which was the source of truth for, customer master, then product, then pricing, the discount, the loyalty. The more details you can provide, the better.
Sure. I guess my particular story really revolved around a pain point about over allocating inventory and just really compromised customer experience. And in this landscape, the architecture was client had a good size ERP system. They had an integrated e-commerce system, and they had what I would call a loosely integrated a couple of retail stores. And really the problems as we looked at encountered is just that they had contention. They'd have two orders showing up for the same item. over allocated, where I guess when the order was placed, the inventory appeared to be available. And so really, as we dug in to remediate this particular issue, really related to the loose integration from the retail location, because they were sometimes the customer would show up there and they didn't have the stock, and so they try to place a sales order and they'd say, oh, we can allocate the inventory. So in the end of the day, the crux of it was timing on integration and how quickly they synchronize data, meaning somebody could place an order on the website, someone could place the order over here, and guess what? Who got there first? So in the end of the day, you know, we tore apart the integration architecture in this particular case, and we were really looking at, you know, where the orders came from and how quickly they were attaching and committing that inventory into the ERP system. And again, when you see point of sale that's an extension of ERP, it's a little better because when they book the transaction, it updates it real time. But in a disconnected, point of sale system, a lot of time they're nightly batches. Well, nightly doesn't work when everybody's trying to steal inventory these days. So that's the story I had. It was all about inventory allocation, which creates huge customer satisfaction issues.
So, Chris, we are actually going to take one step back. Can you describe the business a little bit more in terms of, what kind of business it was, what they were trying to sell, and what were their goals in terms of this omni-channel architecture before we get into the issues of omni-channel? Can you do that, please?
You said the shoes? They were in the shoe business. So this particular client was in the footwear industry, and so again, they had the online presence, and they had the retail, and they had the big distribution center. So they were selling big box, and they were selling B2B and B2C. So as you look at, what was their goal is, of course, to drive revenue and have high customer satisfaction and increase sales. And so, by opening up the B2B channel, they've got their existing customers placing business orders, and then they got a retail website, and they got people out there shopping, placing consumer orders, which again, bulk shipments, direct shipments out of their distribution center. But then they had a walk-in location, which again, somebody could walk in and they could go grab some inventory. And so I think that was really the real challenge, and it was apparel. And again, when the size and that style was gone, it is. And so it's that precision and allocation. It was the timing on the allocation, but certainly that was the business model. It was the shoes of multi-channel, and they wanted people to be able to get an order through lots of different mediums. Whether they walked into a store, it was there, they could place a sales order, or back office, they could call in, or they go to the website. So there was a lot of mechanisms for requests and orders to land in their system.
Okay, so we are going to dig a little deeper into different channels and the order types and the customers as well. So for the B2B, did they have the orders flowing through ERP or website, where they were obviously B2B customers would not walk into the store?
Both. They had sales reps that would go out there and take the orders. The reps would key in the orders. They had people that would call in to customer service and place the orders. And they had customers who would go to the B2B site and order at their leisure offline. So they had every medium, people were able to place orders with them. So.
Okay, interesting. Very interesting. So, Steve, I'm actually going to move to you. What is your omni-channel architecture story that you might be able to share? Try to describe the business model, business goals a bit, and then try to, identify the architecture, roles, and responsibilities of, different systems in terms of the different channel and the order types, and what were the implications of the decisions that you guys had made.
That's a lot of questions all rolled into one.
I know. Sorry.
Well, where I come from, I work in consumer products, goods, especially outdoor retail is my niche. And, we're often working with the marketing team. So when we're thinking about multi-channel, what everybody's thinking about from a marketing perspective is what are the other areas that it's going to be sold in. Yeah. And one of the confusing things about looking, if you're a consumer of a multi-channel tool, and you start Googling this, you're going to get all sorts of things. And so from our perspective, what we're thinking is Amazon's a channel. As Chris mentioned, your dealers are a channel, your consumers are a channel. And the real question is, how do you add all these other channels? And there are systems out there, software as a services, SaaSes that can do that. But they're often difficult to work with because they're not necessarily going to tie in with your ERP. And I would give you one of the answers I would give you about your system of record is at some point your ERP, and I hope you like this, Sam, needs to be the really important system of record because you're an ERP guy. But from a marketing perspective, there aren't any ERPs that really support the needs and functions of the marketers as they're trying to drive sales to your different channels. So you have to find other mechanisms, and so you often end up in the SaaS world, often with things that if they're connected to the ERP, they're connected to the ERP architecturally through your website. So for the marketers, functionally speaking, the system of record is actually the website and all the activity that happens out of there. Well, and I'm sort of misspeaking here because really we're talking about the B2B and the consumer marketers. But if you're talking about the dealers, which they're not really marketers, and the sales team, they're really using the ERP, and they're trying to connect that, say, to Amazon and Alibaba and Walmart and some of those. So, you know, and maybe even through EDI to big box stores. So that the architectures, there's no one architecture that actually works. But I would say that the marketers tend to end up on the SaaS side connected to the website, and the sales, the dealer salespeople end up more directly tied into the ERP and looking for connection between an ERP and maybe through EDI to the bigger entities.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Steve. So, Mike, I'm actually going to move to you. I'm pretty sure you are going to have really fascinating stories in terms of the omni-channel problems, because, you know, inventory is where the real play is. That's where you are going to see the real cracks. So from your experience, you know, tell us a story, describe the business, you know, and how the architecture was laid out and what were the challenges.
Yeah, one of the challenges that I saw, you know, it comes back to what Chris had spoken about in terms of, you know, how do you allocate inventory and when does it get allocated? And one of the things I saw was, I wouldn't quite call it a consumer products company, but it was a Fortune 500 business. There were some online sales, there were some sales through distributors, there were some retail sales, and where we typically ran into problems is when inventory levels started getting low. So, for example, let's say, you know, your average daily sales of N item is, you know, 200 a day. When inventory started to get down to that sub 200 level, right, if there wasn't the replenishment coming behind it, that's when we started to see a lot of conflict, because I mean, it literally came down to timing and what system was talking to what and when. And ultimately, if I remember correctly, I think one of the solutions was, you know, when it hit kind of that average daily rate of sales level, it was, you know, I think in some of the channels it was, hey, call customer service or speak with your sales rep to prevent some of that, you know, the two kids squabbling over the same toy kind of situation. So, you know, having the timing laid out in a repeatable way to at least understand what the pecking order was is what ultimately put us on the path to solving the problem.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Mike, for that. So, Chuck, I'm actually going to move to you. You know, what is your omni-channel story that you might be able to share that you have seen in your experience? And what are the architectural challenges that you have seen in terms of deciding and meeting the omni-channel goals that businesses might be trying to get from the architecture?
Well, I'm going to take you in a different direction. I have created an e-commerce system from scratch for a small B2B company, and all the products were build to order, every single one, and with the unique challenge of building those products and getting them out the door within 2 days. And the industry lead times were, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks. And the interesting struggle with that is because it was build to order, as opposed to inventory was all piece parts. That was less of an issue. That's an ERP planning issue. But the source of truth in this case was that the engineering and construction was built actually into the e-commerce system. And without that construction detail, now understand that this was a e-commerce system that was built custom on the back end. But without that construction detail, everything else was irrelevant. That actually became the source of truth, so that all of the manufacturing instructions went out to the floor, build that thing, and then the product and the order met in shipping so that it get out the door within that 2-day lead time.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for that. So did you see any issues overall in putting this functionality in the e-commerce system, as opposed to obviously that decision that you have to make when you are identifying, let's say, the source of truth for a specific system. In this particular case, you are saying that, you know what, I have made my e-commerce system as the source of truth. Now, I don't know what other channels that this business had. If they had multiple channels, then obviously your let's say if they have to go through the same business logic, that business logic resides in your e-commerce layer. So obviously, either you have to make all of your channels go through the e-commerce layer, or your business logic is not going to be centralized. So did you see any implications because of what you are describing right now?
Yeah, the implications were huge. In fact, it was a B2B company working with small high-tech startups all the way up to the largest subprime contractors in the world, the defense business. And so we had everything from conventional orders, purchase orders, blanket orders, orders to resellers, as well as, one piece, two piece, small orders, fast. In order to achieve fast, we had to have the design inputs and definition in the e-commerce system. And the struggle was to create that, because you have to pre-engineer, in our case, literally billions of combinations, along with pricing model. It was a real struggle, but honestly, it kind of redefined the way business was done in that industry. But by the same token, for all the other channels, we had to maintain a duplicate set of engineering, a duplicate set of design inputs. And that was a burden on the business. It was a tremendous investment in the e-commerce system to create that sort of functionality. Worth it in the end. Return on investment was incredible, but we had duplicate resources.
So obviously, because of duplicate resources, you are going to have tons and tons of challenges, because you are really duplicating it. You are going to be, I don't know if you had some sort of, replication engine that was replicating the data among these systems, so that, let's say in case of Omnichannel, what happens is, let's say if the customer is actually trying to shop or, build a cart on your POS, and then, they are going on your mobile, and then they are going to check the price, and then finally they are going to go to your e-commerce. So there is a lot of overlap in terms of the system. So the inventory that they are seeing in mobile, they should be able to see the same cart on the other, system that you have across the channels. So in this particular case, let's say if you are duplicating the data, I don't know if your reconciliation was real time, because the real time reconciliation is really expensive from the system perspective. It's very hard to do it. Okay, so how did you guys maintain the reconciliation? And did you have any sort of implications because of this duplication?
Yeah, so all of this business was the end product were build to order, every single one. Okay, so the one benefit was that there wasn't an issue in differences in inventory between what someone saw online in e-commerce or what we were able to quote and get out the door. Everything was build to order. So thankfully that didn't exist, or doesn't exist. The still company is still killing it doing this to this day. But no, it's not in real time. And when you have that kind of short fuse to get everything done, the reconciliation, the ERP needs to be nearly instantaneous, lest your piece part inventory get out of control. If your piece part inventory gets out of control, you begin to lose pieces. You get behind the supply chain 8-ball, you can't fulfill, and now your 2-day promise is shot, because the lead time for the components was much longer than the lead time for the product. So that reconciliation, it required an awful lot of scrambling to make sure that everything was done, ASAP. And when I say ASAP, no exceptions, not ASAP, I'll get to it. ASAP now. That is a huge problem, especially for a small company. But they pulled it off. We pulled it off.
So, okay, so I am actually going to have a follow-up question for Chris on the same story, because in your shoe business, in case of your engineering business, you don't have as much of the problem, because your order size is going to be bigger. If the business is not as consumerized as you are going to have some sort of, outdoor retail, shoe, apparel business. Those are very different business, the way consumers behave, the way, they transact, the way they interact with the system. So you need to have the real-time reconciliation, and you need to have the appropriate source of truth identified. If you don't have, you will not be able to implement the omni-channel experience in the system. So Chris, let's say if I go back to you and you were to sort of, again, identify the source of truth of different business objects, which systems would you utilize to identify the source of truth, and what is going to be your reconciliation logic to enable the omni-channel experience?
Sure. And I think, I started with inventory. And so the source of truth on inventory is going to be the ERP system. And the reconciliative inventory is a physical inventory at some point. And typically the ERP system's overwriting the values in the e-com site or in the retail POS. If that's the single source of truth, it's not syncing. That really, I send a file to the e-com site really fast. So those values are overwritten with the current on hand available type of computations. But the inventory one is reconciliation. As Steve said, an omni-channel, a lot of times if I'm B2C, that customer master never makes it to the ERP. I'm driving in one record per state, and I've got millions of people out there. So to his point, the omni-channel is the marketing database. Okay. And so that mechanism, but that can be that. B2B, the ERP is the customer master source of truth, because the B2B starts in the ERP before they can authorize to buy. B2C starts in the website. So it's very interesting between B2C, B2B, where those objects live. But customers, contacts versus B2B ERP, B2C could be the omni-channel or the website. Inventory is always the ERP system. Planning, forecasting is always the ERP system. So those are my comments. So
here, in case of, I'm going to have a clarifying question for you, Chris,
sure,
to make sure that we are really developing the architecture for our shoe business, which is really important, because that's where you have the real play for the omni-channel experience, and that's where you are not going to have 5 hours to reconcile your data, because the customer is actually creating the transaction, starting the transaction on mobile, and then going to the second source, which could be POS, which is a completely disparate source of data, right? So you need to be able to identify that transaction in your POS. Let's say if the person is walking, they are playing on mobile, probably, trying to get the coupon or trying to track the loyalty, and then they are actually walking to the store. So this process is instantaneous.
It's different, right? The cash transaction, the inventory has left the building. The order, we're allocating, somebody's got to go find it, pick it, pack it, ship it. So there's a delayed process on order fulfillment versus the cash transaction, to your point. They walk in, they take it, it's gone. It should be real-time recording. That inventory has gone to the building versus a soft allocation, a little different type of booking against that inventory master.
Okay, amazing. So Steve, what are your
thoughts? I had one more thing just about architecture, and I was going to say that an extension of this omni-channel, I have another customer that the way they're attacking omni-channel is through EDI. So just as an architectural perspective, retail, back office systems, but EDI is the facilitation between QVC, HSN, Walmart coming in, all these big players coming in EDI, but 3PL. So they got the ins and outs from ERP and e-com to via EDI to 3PL. So I just want to throw EDI out there as an architectural consideration that still supports omni-channel. And again, the communication there is pretty fast in and out. So just throwing that in. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Sorry, I am going to have a clarifying question, and maybe,
sure,
if others have the clarifying question, obviously they can ask as well. But, in my experience, EDI is a very asynchronous model. Omni-channel is very, very instantaneous and asynchronous as well. Okay, that's what those two models are really designed for. So tell me again, see how
there's a lot of fingers, Sam, right? So it's not a one size fit all. And so just as they have the e-com that flows through Amazon and orders are all coming through the e-commerce channel, they've got big companies that want to do direct ship, Walmart and so forth, and they're bringing those transits in through an EDI mechanism. And it is, hey, the orders come in, they allocate the inventory when they hit the system. So there's no issues there. That order's allocated, they pick, pack, and fulfill. The inventory's gone. So the EDI is a very accurate way of allocating inventory, even if they're pushing it out to a 3PL. So that is part of an omni-channel mechanism. Like I said, there's a lot of different fingers, not just POS, mail order, phone app. But again, someone could go into Walmart, and it's a direct ship from Walmart through a disti that's kind of behind the scenes. Does that make sense?
Amazing. Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Steve, so from your experience, what do you think so far in terms of the reconciliation? Do you agree, disagree in terms of the architecture? What are your thoughts?
Well, I was getting ready to agree with almost everything you guys were saying, and I'm glad you brought up the word asynchronous and synchronous, because the ERP is not everything is synchronous. Synchronous means it just happens right now, right? And if you've got a really good API running off your website, it knows exactly how much stuff is in stock this second, and when you sell it, 5 seconds later, it gets removed from the inventory of the ERP. But if you're working with, say, Cabela's, and they're selling and put Amazon and Walmart in this category. They're warehousing your own product for themselves. That's an asynchronous inventory activity, right? So once you send those 10,000 units to Amazon and they put it all in their warehouses, you're not worried about what your inventory says in your ERP, because those things are gone. On the other hand, like I have a client that does work with Cabela's and Amazon, and that's the case, but they also work with Cabela's, who's forced them to drop ship for them from the orders on the Cabela's website. And so they have EDI interactions with their ERP, and those need to be synchronous from a theoretical standpoint, but it's just not feasible. Well, they just haven't gotten to the point where it's feasible for them to actually report immediate inventory to Cabela's, so Cabela's knows they're not selling something that doesn't exist. Luckily, they're a company that does really good forecasting, so they don't have to worry about that. Like Mike was talking about earlier, getting under 200 units, and if you've got inventory fluctuations or somebody's counting wrong, you might only have 50 or something, or God forbid, maybe you have 10 and you have 0, or it says you have 10. So when you're thinking about the omni-channel, I was going to say you have to remember that some of it's asynchronous and some of it's not. You don't always have to have the database be connected synchronously to every omni-channel that you're trying to service.
Well, and you bring up a really interesting point, Steve, in that one way I think about it is omni-channel really comes down to the execution. Order comes in, how do you execute and fulfill that order, and then how do you sync up with inventory? And then if we take a step back and walk a little bit further upstream in making sure we've got enough of the right product at the right time, that's where forecasting and demand planning and supply planning, they're kind of hovering in the background, because if there isn't strong process upstream, then the inventory is just not going to be there. So it's it kind of, when we look at a supply chain and the links across the supply chain, I see omni-channel, it's that link between the customer and the business, but then inside of the business, it's making sure that the product is there when they need it. So, as Chuck was talking through his example of a business that's 100% make to order, my brain just started spinning in terms of, okay, what kind of inventory levels do you have to maintain on all the pieces and parts and components?
Yeah.
And then you start factoring in lead times, and I just see this veritable iceberg of inventory and just a whole bunch of cash tied up. So yeah, it's all connected.
Okay.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges that if you own a business, you're probably not even thinking about some of the stuff we're talking about. What you're really thinking about is, how do I actually connect what I have to other channels in a functional, cost-effective way? And that's what companies like BigCommerce are sort of trying to do. And there's other SaaSes on the market that you're supposed to connect your ERP to, so that it tells the SaaS what your inventory is, and then you click a button, then I'm connected to Amazon, and click a button, I'm connected to Walmart, click a button, Alibaba, keep naming them. There's a bunch of different marketplaces. That's what most business people are thinking about. And it's the technology people they're trying to understand, well, why is that tool better for us than another one? And it's the marketing people who are saying, well, I got to hit my sales goals. So, I actually haven't figured out yet how to get all those people to talk nicely to each other. We work every day and try and get better at it every day, right?
Right. So I agree with that assessment. But I mean, even if, let's say, the sales and marketing people are able to sell, but if your orders are not going to go out, then, what's going to happen? You are not going to get the next order. So that's why your system architecture is really important, that you are able to deliver whatever you are committing to your customer. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Sure. And so in that example I used on EDI, what's really happening is the HSN and QVC came into play, and the option for the customer is, you could go into their web forms and print the order, go key it into your ERP, pick, pack, and ship it, and then go key it back in. Well, the concern is, right, if the architecture's not there and, we got 300 orders the first day, we have a problem. And to turn it all off, to your point, if you don't have your ducks together, and part of that is forecasting the demand, and do you need a fully automated system? And again, even to push back the inventories. But that's a perfect example where they'll give you, right, Steve? Oh, you got to integrate. Oh, well, we'll give you a way to go print your orders. Well, anyway, you get it. And that architecture, that EDI platform I described, is the choice to start with a fully integrated between those suppliers. So there's not really a risk of a customer experience problem, because you can't do the back end fulfillment once those orders drop into your system. So,
okay,
excellent
so
point.
Chuck, yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of the EDI, with the integration of the systems, most of the parts of the system don't actually require real-time processing. Inventory, clearly, okay, but when your orders drop, your orders don't need real time. Batch works. Do I want it to be delayed long? No, I don't. There are other aspects of the system. An aspect of this could be loyalty. Sam, early on, you mentioned or alluded to almost a seamless flow of customer recognition from mobile to in-store. Well, we do that we have to be able to identify that customer. If they start here, they can do it, but then they get into store and they can begin that all over again. Okay. But an ideal customer experience would be able to have some sort of handoff. And we do that through loyalty program or some other, data method. Likewise, something when you talk about B2B, there are things like payment terms. You have new customers, and the new customers come on board and they start out with their payment terms one way, and then they want to go and they want to place an e-commerce order. Well, but I just got my payment terms approved, and they may not be waiting. So there are different timings that are required for these things that are going to affect customer experience. EDI is great probably for the overwhelming majority of those processes, but not all of them. And most definitely where it pertains to heavily affecting customer experience.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Chuck, I think the omni-channel experience is going to be slightly more relevant in the retail situations. It's probably not going to be as relevant in case of your B2B, because if you have your payment term approval or credit approval, obviously you are implying that that's probably not going to be omni-channel, unless the omni-channel transaction is very long-standing. That could be like 5 days or 10 days. I mean, that could be a problem as well. But then you have a lot of room. The assumption and the challenging part with omni-channel architecture typically is with these retail transactions, because they happen in a very short window, and then you have to communicate with all of the systems. They need to be in sync to be able to perform that transaction. That's where the real trick is. So obviously, today's topic is really the omni-channel architecture. I don't know if you guys have seen any scenarios in case of B2B where omni-channel is going to be relevant. I don't know if you're going to have any stories. We can cover those. But in my experience, I don't think omni-channel is probably going to be as relevant in case of B2B.
I think you're going to have limited channels in B2B for sure, but the opportunity in e-commerce and multiple channels is growing. There are numerous manufacturers out there that sell through both direct to consumer and also wholesale. I visited one this week. It's not 3 or 4 channels, but 2 channels is technically omni-channel. And there's tremendous opportunity in the B2B. We have a very B2C mentality because that's what we understand as consumers. But the opportunity in manufacturing and the opportunity in B2B in e-commerce and that sort of thing is growing dramatically. And the smart companies are getting in on it, as early on as they possibly can.
Just one very small distinction there are 2 terms. One is called multi-channel. That's a very different architecture versus omni-channel. In case of multi-channel, obviously you are going to have tons and tons of channels. If your number of channels are increasing, sure, no problem whatsoever. It's just going to be one another channel. It's not as challenging. Omni-channel architecture implies that the experience is going to be seamless as you go across the systems. It's going to feel as if you are utilizing and transacting with the same system, even though you are transacting across the devices, across the channels.
Understood.
Chris, so are you going to have any sort of comments with respect to multi-channel versus omni-channel? Have you seen any sort of architectural differences there by any chance?
And I think you're valid. The EDI comment is more of a multi-channel because, with the Walmart and all these disties coming in with retail transactions. And I know what you're saying about Omni-channel. And I've got another project we're lighting up, but it's for a company that owns about a dozen resorts. And it's going to be related to the hotel reservation system where they want the common experience between the 12 different hotel sites. So that is more of an Omni-channel experience than what we would articulate multi-channel. So I would agree with that.
Yeah. So now, okay, so I'm actually going to have a clarifying question, and I'm actually going to ask you to design the architecture for this scenario, because this is the real omni-channel scenario. So let's say if you were trying to design the architecture for, let's say, hotels, obviously they're going to have some sort of POS system at the cashier kiosk, and then you're going to have some sort of centralized ERP system. I don't care what you call. I mean, Steve is going to call me out that I have preference or bias for ERP. The only thing I'm trying to say is you have to have your architecture centralized. I don't care what system you want to call. Typically when we think of the e-commerce system, that is going to be slightly more customer facing. That is going to be, slightly more channel centric, channel biased, channel focused. But when you look at the centralized system, that needs to be unbiased, that needs to be centralized, that needs to be serving every single channel that you have and must have the centralized business rule that is going to provide you the financial control as well as the inventory control. So Chris, on to you. If you were to design the architecture for this scenario, for this business, how would you structure this?
So, I mean, in the context of, we're talking about the hotel system specifically, right? And so really that architecture really is, most of it's external to the ERP because of the nature of the transactions. And it's really platformed on a CRM, the customer engagement platform. So as you think about that is the platform, preface and ERP, it's not full e-commerce, but it's reservationing. And so there was a lot of custom there. But the architecture was, we went for an off the shelf. We're using the Microsoft Omnichannel product. We're not building a custom, but that's what's plugging into the customer engagement platform to drive the reservation systems for these groups. And yes, there's a back and forth at the ERP, but again, the capacities and the reservations and all that stuff is held externally to the ERP, but it's a similar inventory. They're selling capacity based on dates and at different resorts. And so, but all of that is really front office centric. It's not back office. The back office really catching the accounting entries, where in that context, the omni-channel platform is under the CRM channel, but that's really the customer facing and all the contact facing. So that's all the identities, everything's kept there. The profiles, the personalities, they keep it all in that space. But that is the architecture. And we actually are moving these people from an all custom platform to a more standard omni-channel architecture out of Microsoft's tool set up in the cloud. So does that answer your question?
So I'm actually going to make your life easier. So what I am going to do is I'm actually going to replace those hotel locations with retail locations where you have the real product, and those retail locations are going to have their own warehouses. And they have the POS, and then you have the e-commerce system. Your goal is to make sure your customers are going to get consistent experience across your POS systems as well as your e-commerce system. And then you are going to have some sort of ERP system that a lot of people hate. Okay, but your goal is to design the architecture and provide the consistent experience across the system.
And I'm lucky because I have a high-end solution that has both distribution and has retail extension out into the site. So in that model, I've got a fully integrated ERP with a point of sale component in it. So I'm not bolting on a third party. So I'm a little lucky there, but I still come up with an e-commerce architecture that's fully two-way integrated to the ERP platform, but it serves my distribution business, my website, as well as my point of sale location. So I could walk into a retail location, I could go buy 3 items and place an order for the other 2, drops the order in the system. It could be shipped out of another retail location in that architecture model because of the software selection. In the non-integrated model, great. Well, then it's, okay, I got my ERP, I got my e-com, I'm designing the integration lanes. And then in the retail, we're looking at the lanes that need to flow between those to keep the integrity of, right? And what's the frequencies? Asynchronous, synchronous, you know what I mean? So what's the interval that I need to do? It's a little different architecture. If I'm dealing with 3 separate products, then there's a lot of integration swim lanes I'm developing. Like I said, I'm a little spoiled where I've got an application that really extends into retail and has that omni-channel architecture being built out behind the scenes by the big guys in the cloud. So.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. So, Steve, I'm actually going to move to you. So obviously you are not going to be as lucky as Chris because you are utilizing a completely different e-commerce system in your architecture. So it's going to be not as integrated as the Microsoft products because they are built from scratch to support the retail business model. Okay, if you are going to, let's say, build a custom product or the website, it could be on WooCommerce, or maybe you are utilizing Shopify or BigCommerce. Okay, when you do that, you have to build all of these reconciliations the way Chris is describing. He's lucky, you are not. Okay, so now you were to design the architecture for the system where you are utilizing these custom products. How are you going to build this architecture to make sure you have the seamless experience across these systems?
Well, first, I'm gonna challenge as to which of us is lucky, because I think we're both lucky. Each type of implementation, whether like his full system or more customized, has pros and cons. And certainly, it's true that his is going to be more integrated from the beginning, but there's nothing to say that ours wouldn't be as more integrated later. It's certainly more customizable, maybe easier. It depends on the system, but to get to the architecture piece, I think that what I like to do is I look at the stakeholders who are involved. And when you're talking multi-channel, like one of your stakeholders is, well, you're talking about multi-channel that we're talking about. We're talking about a company that is selling to box stores, might be selling to mom and pop stores, is probably selling to Amazon, I'll list Walmart again, and then they're also selling direct to consumer. And each of those people are a different type of stakeholder. And the other stakeholders inside that system are going to be the salespeople who are working with the mom and pop dealers and probably the box store dealers. You're going to have another stakeholder in the phone support team that's taking orders on the phone from everybody over the age of 65 who's afraid to give their credit card online and doesn't realize that the salesperson is doing the same for them anyway. And you might even have sales reps out in the field who are another stakeholder who could be placing orders for the independent dealers. They're not going to be placing orders for the box stores. And then you have the dealers themselves who are another stakeholder. There's no ERP that I've ever seen, and no ERP, even with tons of bolt-ons, that actually performs well for every single one of those stakeholders. And I'm not going to pretend that the things that we built was perfect for all of them either, because it's constantly, the bar is changing every day. But with our system, or the way we work, we're trying to recognize what the ERP is actually really good at and how the company is using it. And how the stakeholders inside that company are using it. And we view any sort of web-based tool that we build as just a data entry point for the ERP. So we do want the ERP to be the system of record. But what ends up being kind of true, and Chris sort of referred to this, is that the marketing team doesn't care about the ERP. And the ERP doesn't care about HubSpot, right? The ERP doesn't care about MailChimp, but the marketers do. So the architecture that I would explain to you would be that, yes, the ERP is a system of record for pretty much everything related to inventory and consumer activity related to purchasing. But there's some SaaS out there, or some web-based thing that is going to be the system of record for most of the marketing activities, and the marketers and the salespeople are going to be using that. The stakeholders for Home Depot and Cabela's, they're going to have an EDI system set up between you and them. You're not going to get EDI systems set up from Bob's Bait and Tackle in Eufaula, Alabama, but that person might be savvy enough to understand how to fill out a spreadsheet. Most likely, they're just going to want to fill out a website order and get it and be able to place a preseason date on it. So. I don't know if I mentioned all the stakeholders. Hopefully that gives you a sense of the architecture. I guess I could get more specific about the architecture if I haven't really answered your question.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Steve. So, Mike, I'm actually going to move to you. What would be your take? Let's say if you were to design the architecture, or if you have seen similar architecture, how they had designed and what were the challenges? Let's say if it was not really optimized for omnichannel.
So, my favorite question in the world to ask is, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve? The bright side way is, what's the desired outcome? But fundamentally, it's what's the problem we're trying to solve? And it's understanding, from each of the stakeholders, what we need to do to get them the solution they need. So quite frankly, when it would come to the architecture, right, I would be calling Chris or Chuck or Steve. I consider myself more on the strategy and S&OP side and helping build, the processes and linking the people with the process. So it's really begin with the end in mind. What's the problem you're trying to solve? And then, like for me, it would be step back and let the gurus do their work in figuring out, what the people behind the curtain have to do to solve the problem.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Mike. So I'm actually going to come back to you, Chuck. What's your take? I mean, how would you design, let's say, if you were to design the architecture, what would be your take on this?
Well, it really depends on the size of the business and what they're trying to achieve. I think one of the amazing things that we're going to be watching over the coming years are two very, very extreme things. Coming back to my world in logistics and fulfillment and warehousing, small businesses, especially in the retail sector, need to compete, and they can't given their current business model. So there are increasing numbers of logistics companies, 3PLs, that are catering to those smaller businesses to keep overflow inventory and outsource services to them. And in that case, I think about the product that Chris was discussing. They have a distribution and a POS system that could potentially be licensed to the retail companies, where they can take care of all that back office, where they can have more inventory than they've had before. So that is an emerging thing, and it's likely to be outsourced in that case. Then there's the complete opposite. I am absolutely fascinated by Amazon's retail strategy. Amazon Go, Amazon 4-star stores, Amazon Fresh, and now they're getting into Amazon department stores, which are likely, although folks don't really know, they're likely to also function as reverse logistics return locations and also distribution points for fulfillment. And that's going to be the ultimate omni-channel. I imagine that you're going to walk, Amazon Go, you're walking out the door, there's no cashier. So talk about a seamless experience. You're going to walk in there and it's going to know everything about all Amazon inventory across all locations in the world, which are growing, feels like exponentially the distribution points. So I think you have these two things that are going to emerge. Either way, that data structure, that system design is going to have to be more integrated. It's going to have to be more omni-channel. We're going to have to bring those things together. The marketers and all that stuff, that just isn't going to come into play in terms of what actually powers the business model. You and I know nothing happens without revenue, without a sale happening. But it's just not going to power the business model. You can't sell if you can't deliver. If you can't fulfill, it's not going to happen.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, something that Chuck said really kind of sparked, the idea of reverse logistics. Store in our town a couple years back, retailer, prominent name. The storefront ultimately became a place where people just return stuff. All the people in town would buy everything online. It'd ship to their home. They'd say, "Oh no, this shirt doesn't fit, my daughter Sally. I'm going to take it to the store." And the kind of net outcome is that store ended up taking in far, far, far more returns than product that ever got sold in the store. So it's interesting because, we think about Amazon and some reverse logistics there. I would say, provided it's built into the model, right, there could be other savings in terms of, freight costs. If it's like, hey, here's this Amazon one stop, and instead of dropping your stuff off at UPS or the post office and returning it, right, you take it to the storefront. So if that, I guess we could almost call it a feedback loop into omni-channel in dealing with returns and reverse logistics. I mean, that's like a whole nother, bag of worms that can open up.
Yep, you are so right. And that is going to increase the significant complexity. So I know that some people are muted. I don't know. Chris, you have a comment?
Just listening. He's right. Reverse logistics, it creates a whole new problem on return authorizations and where they ship them and in transit transfers. So it adds a lot more business process requirements at those retail locations, I think is what I would say there. Maybe some non-traditional POS functions as you look at, is there an RMA? What's the process? So interesting stuff.
And Chuck, did you have a comment as well? You unmuted too. No? Okay. So Chris, I feel that I didn't have enough fun with you, and I'm going to have some more fun. Okay, so let's change the story a little bit more. So obviously you said that you know what, in this particular case you got lucky that Microsoft provides the out of the box integration for your retail locations, right? So let's say if I'm your customer and your assumption is going to be that I am willing to change my POS system, which I have been using for last 15 years. Okay, so now if I'm your customer and I'm going to say that, what, I don't really like the POS system that Microsoft is providing. So I'm going to use something like either NCR or IBM or Square or whatever. That's my choice. Okay, I'm going to use that. So now you have to build the architecture. And for e-commerce, I feel that I should be using Shopify. I don't want to use anything from Microsoft. Okay, so let's say if I were to build this architecture, how would you approach this, Chris?
So, again, if I get 3 disparate systems where I have to figure out the integrations, I mean, there's a detailed analysis where, right, okay, where's the source of truth? We go through that exercise and we look at, the integration swim lanes. That's it. We diagram it. And it's what I would say is we look at, and I've got Shopify to ERP loops. And as you look at standalone POS or multiple POS, basically there's different architectures because even a lot of the POS systems have purchasing and they have their own inventory masters. They have a lot of that there. So I think there's some analysis on which one do they have, how open is it? But just to that point is, do they have a sales order type of mechanism in there? Great. They certainly have inventory. They have stock counts. We're syncing those back. Or do they have a sales order concept? Again, away from a cash transaction. So we're looking at the transactions that could originate. Great. I need to send a sales order back to my ERP. Do they handle an RMA? Oh, okay. So now I send back that says, hey, there's stock at the location, but some accounting transactions. But that's really how we attack these when we have disparate systems is you're rationalizing the swim lanes. You do a great diagram, and then you step through and talk about all the process and all the customer scenarios that you may have at every point along the way. And that's where it starts. It starts on the drawing board with a piece of paper. And again, the solution I talked about, that doesn't fit everybody's budget either. So that's the other thing we haven't talked about is do, re, mi. Right, Steve? I'm sure you run up the charges. That's what I was thinking. But to that point, if price is an issue, but even creating a lot of integration swim lanes, but again, we're still going to look, is there anything off the shelf that integrates? How does it integrate? And again, a lot of point of sale systems that have that inventory and that purchasing, all they send is a journal entry. That's not going to get it if I'm really trying to, can I take an order in the back office and have it shipped from the retail location? Can I take a sales order to the retail, have it shipped out of the distribution center? What if I have it shipped out of yet another retail location? So a lot of integration swim lanes to facilitate that. And again, timing, as Steve mentioned, we have to rationalize that as well to figure out where are we going to get in contention, because we don't want to do fixed things. Okay, we want to mitigate, right, and just deal with exceptions. So, but that's how I would approach it. That's how we've been approaching it for a long time.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. So now we are going to talk a little bit about the business issue, right? And we are going to look at the warehouse and fulfillment architecture. And again, even though I am using the word architecture, the way you are going to be designing the warehouse is going to be your business decision based on your business goals. So now, let's say if you were to design the warehouse architecture, how would you be structuring so that you can enable the omni-channel experience? Because each of the decisions that you are going to make, where your warehouse is going to be, that is going to drive a lot of things from the cost perspective. That is going to drive, how your shipments are going to be. So, Steve, I'm actually going to come to you. So let's say if I am actually giving you the business problem or maybe best practices that you have seen when you talk about the warehouse and fulfillment architecture, when it comes to enabling the omni-channel experience, how would you be structuring the warehouse? Would you have, let's say, a centralized location of the warehouse that is actually going to fulfill each of the retail location, or would you approach it differently?
Well, I guess it sort of depends on the size of the business, but I think part of what's just call it empirically true is that if you're sitting in Kentucky with a warehouse, you're right next to UPS's hub, and they can hit everybody in the Midwest and the East Coast, pretty much in your 2-day window that everybody wants to hit. And they're not going to hit Alaska and Hawaii from there. So I think a lot of companies are looking at, like, Reno is a shipping hub. It's why Patagonia and a bunch of companies move their warehouses there. And if you're running a maquiladora in Mexico, you probably are going to have warehouses along the border in Brownsville area, El Paso, right? And so, Amazon's a good example. I mean, they seem to have a warehouse in every town now, being a little hyperbolic. But if the goal is to get the product there as fast as possible, you literally have to have more warehouses and more locations. So when you're looking at the architecture, like let's say you were working with NetSuite, it's not that hard to develop NetSuite to recognize that a zip code is in Iowa and should be shipped from Kentucky, and another zip code is in Dallas and should be shipped from Brownsville, and another zip code is in California and should be shipped from Reno. So it's in a certain way, that's almost the simplest question you've asked all day. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad for that. Okay, all right. So, Mike or Chuck, do you have any final comments, or we can only take the closing advice because we are close to our time?
Yeah, I would say that from my closing comment is actually just going to build on that, and that is in terms of fulfillment and getting these things out the door. I guess the only thought I want to leave with is distributed locations is really where it's at. The current state of warehouse design is incredibly inefficient because it's random into random locations as opposed to a human organization system that situates my brain. And I would expand that to the warehouse design. And I think the more the people are able to do that, whether it be shared space and 3PLs, to spread their inventory across the country and across their purview, the more efficient, the better they're going to be able to fulfill.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for that, Chuck. Chris, what would be your closing advice?
As I said, I draw big pictures. So, to outline the different systems and look at the different flows of information and what originates here, what terminates here, and think through customer experiences every point along the way. It'll give you perspective, and you may have a second revision of that. And you do all that before you build it. But even after you do that, ask a lot of questions. Find out what's in play, what's working, what's not working, and try to avoid some of the pitfalls that other people do, because other people have been through this. There might be a lot to learn. Okay.
Okay, amazing. Mike, what is going to be your closing advice, please?
Yeah, it's, for me, it's what's the problem we're trying to solve, understand where we are, where we want to go, and then, leveraging Chris's idea, let's draw a map and figure out what the paths are to get there. And, if there are challenges, let's figure them out early and work together to create a solution.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for that, Mike. Steve, what is going to be your closing advice? I didn't mean to give you a hard time, brother,
No, mine's the same as everybody else. I mean, you got to back up, ask the questions, to draw that big picture, and take into account what the stakeholders are. You really have to identify the stakeholders. I think that's probably one of the things people don't do when they try and draw the pictures. Actually, name them. Once you do that, you get a nice big picture that I think we all would appreciate.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for that, Steve. And guys, that's it for today. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our digital transformation series. And we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, and we pick one topic related to digital transformation. So don't miss next week's show. We are going to be here. On that note, I really want to thank you for your time and insights, guys.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Sam. Take care, guys.
You guys are awesome.